Many people know Portland, Oregon as an innovator in regional urban planning. Its 2040 growth concept, developed in the early 1990s, is widely described as a pioneering planning framework for sustainable polycentric urban development, not only in the city core, but in the entire region, including its suburbs and towns. But less well discussed are the challenges that the Portland region has experienced over the years to actually implement this vision. In 2009, Metro, the region's planning authority, convened a group of policy professionals, real estate developers, planners, and other to look at the implementation issues for the region and to formulate some recommendations about how the region's goals could be achieved. The 2040 growth concept, as it's known, was a 50-year plan that was developed in the early 1990s to identify the existing centers and corridors and to connect them with regional transit and multimodal transportation, walkable mixed-use development, compact form, and other better quality urbanization. The existing centers of the region followed a remarkable power law distribution of many small centers, a few big centers, and a middle number of middle centers. And the 2040 plan sought to encourage the connectivity of those, in part to capture trips within the centers to allow people to live, work, and play within their existing neighborhoods for the most part, and to travel to the other more distant centers only when they needed to, less often. So this was seen as a more optimum distribution of destinations within the region and a more sustainable form of urbanization. However, by the late 2000s, it was recognized that the region was struggling to implement this plan, and there were significant barriers, economic, regulatory, and other barriers to implementing the plan. So Metro, working with the Center for Portland Metropolitan Studies at Portland State University, convened a group of planners, developers, policy experts, and others who could formulate recommendations about what the challenges were and how they could be overcome. I was one of those participants, and I can report on the recommendations and what we had learned. The report recognized that we needed more innovative approaches. We needed good design, which was going to be critical in gaining and sustaining public acceptance and building the kinds of communities that we want. We needed a process as well as specific innovations. We needed a structure for ongoing collaboration and learning, and that was to be maintained at the local university, Portland State, as well as the University of Oregon. We needed diagnostic tools to assess the health of individual centers and corridors and the resources that were needed in each one to unlock their potential. We needed a kind of public-private development toolkit that could form the resources that would be needed in specific locations. We needed financial tools, gap financing in particular. The group's proposal envisioned development templates, in effect plug and play models that would work for retrofitting the area's centers and corridors and to create value in new ways, innovative new forms of development, public-private institutional collaboration, new kinds of development models and collaborations, new tools and processes for local development and development review. The committee recognized that we were getting the worst of both worlds. We were getting a slow, cumbersome, expensive design development review process, and we were getting a result that no one was really satisfied with. The group also recognized that the region already has a significant supply of underdeveloped land, including things like parking lots, excess median rights of way, and derelict sites, marginally used sites, and so on. We needed to remove development constraints to unlock the potential of these sites. There were problems like fragmented property ownership, difficulty of aggregating parcels, the availability and cost of parking, which was a significant barrier, inflexible development codes, fees that didn't support compact development, and so on. The group also recognized that good design is critical in gaining and sustaining public acceptance and building the kinds of communities that the citizens of the region want. In retrospect, this was foreshadowing the kind of divisiveness that we've seen more recently of dividing different communities and trying to, in effect, force changes down the throats of unwilling communities rather than building consensus, building support for win-win models and involving community members and neighbors in supporting the development process. Things like model zoning codes, a form-based concept that the citizens themselves would be able to review and evaluate and endorse and embrace. Design toolkit supported by a public-private collaboration and by the citizens, allowing communities to develop their own customized design standards, easing the complexity of approval and the cost and difficulty of getting good projects built. The group recognized that an action plan would be needed, including development of mechanisms for public finance and the creation of development toolkits and new development approaches. This diagnostic toolkit for centers and corridors was thought to be particularly important, recognizing that conditions of the community may not be ready for growth, and that the diagnostic toolkit can provide guidelines as to the types of conditions needed and the tools that might be available to make these sites ready. And that would allow Metro to help local governments to build awareness, political support, and the right conditions for growth. And the diagnostic tool would also help developers by allowing communities to demonstrate their willingness and ability to make a public investment in the right kind of development, good quality development. One of the key elements of this development toolkit was the ability to develop design prototypes and design manuals with the citizens ahead of time to allow public and private expectations to be formed about infill development and to enhance those by having a family of physical development prototypes to help local efforts to implement area plans and strategies for town centers and corridors. These prototypes could be used to illustrate site plans, building formats, phase developments, parking and street designs, perhaps with 10 to 15 basic prototype development templates with variations. And these could be adjusted to allow simplified and expedited reviews of projects that conform to these, including simpler design review. Projects that want to or need to go another route could be subject to more discretionary review. Also, very importantly, the overall form of the buildings could be set as background, as good sort of sturdy urban forms. And then the exterior detailing of approved prototypes could be subject to more creativity, more design variation. That's a more optimum combination of the, if you like, the top down and the bottom up, the top down overall form that is set by neighborhood expectations, by citizen expectations, and then the more bottom up, the individual creativity and expression. And these could include things like mixed use, base story structures, plus wood frame, courtyard housing, other kinds of development models. This follows the idea that the buildings that we need can be quite creative and personalized, very artistic in the facades and in the way that they express their particular unique designs. But this does not mean that these buildings need to have bizarre new shapes or expensive forms that are somehow deemed to be artistic expressiveness. There's a famous book by Stuart Brand called How Buildings Learn that makes the point that there are parts of a building that can be unique and expressive while the overall form of the building can change at a much slower rate and be good quality background urbanism. The architect Robert Venturi referred to ducks as shapes that tend to express themselves in some sort of new wild form, as opposed to a more sort of sturdy decorated shed, as he referred to it. And I think many people do believe that we don't need this kind of form, which is very expensive and appeals perhaps to only the higher end of the real estate market. We need housing that works for everyone, that's affordable, that's equitable, and that is sustainable. And that's a greater priority than providing exotic new housing for higher income families. We also need to review the tools that we have and perhaps supplement those with different kinds of tools, tax increment finance, grant forms, economic improvement districts, various other mechanisms that could be developed, especially for gap financing to make that available as well. Incentive-based pilots, prototypes that perhaps developers are willing to make to push the boundary of what the market is willing to accept and what can be shown as a pilot project. We need also different kinds of processes for conveners and facilitators, education and outreach, new tools for centers and corridors, infrastructure financing, gap finance bank perhaps, pilot programs and so on, expanded incentives and technical support. So in other words, this group back in 2009 was proposing a win-win plug-and-play model of urbanism, of pre-approved plans and models and types and codes working with, not against, existing residents, a model that we might call QIMBY, quality in my backyard, not NIMBY, not in my backyard, and not YIMBY, yes in my backyard to anything that gets density, but quality in my backyard instead. It emphasized the ability to diagnose and to unlock marginal sites, not the good quality sites, the historic buildings, the existing urban fabric, but the unused sites, the wasted sites, the unsustainable sites that need to be developed, parking lots, excess land, derelict sites, and so on. And the ability to apply incentives to direct the growth that we need, not just to follow the market, which often goes right to the top, to the highest income real estate development, which only exacerbates the problems of affordability, equity, and sustainability. And again, assembling a toolkit of tools to help to accomplish all these goals, to unlock these targeted sites, to disincentivize destructive growth, destructive of our heritage and of our existing affordable stock, and to achieve the communities that we want, all of us together in a democracy, which is what we presumably want to achieve, not to force housing down the throats of existing residents, but to identify win-win approaches and to motivate communities to work together to achieve the quality that they want, the communities that they want, the quality in their backyards. Thank you. Now, it's been over a decade since the Centers and Corridors report was published, and I think it's a fair question to ask from this vantage point, why hasn't the Portland region made more progress on the challenges identified in the report? Why have so few of the proposals been implemented? And indeed, why has so little of the 2040 growth concept been achieved? I think it would also be a fair criticism that we've allowed ourselves to slide into some destructive approaches that have only exacerbated our challenges of affordability and equity and sustainability. And we've done so based on some fallacies, I think, and I'll mention several of them. One of them is what I would call build, baby, build, the naive idea that just adding units will somehow magically address affordability, equity, and sustainability without remembering that in real estate, remember the three most important factors are location, location, and location, that it matters enormously where we build and what we build. Related to that is a temptation to demonize other people, frankly, like existing homeowners or advocates of historic preservation or other groups that have been allies in the past. And clearly that's not a promising way forward in many ways. It's a fallacy to think, for example, that tearing down an existing $400,000 house and replacing it with two $700,000 duplexes takes us significantly farther towards our regional goals of affordability, equity, and sustainability. The divisiveness of these battles is very destructive, and it does, unfortunately, too often reward unaccountable financial self-interest who so often do encourage this kind of hyper-adversarialism in the age of Twitter. Moreover, this overfocus on the older core neighborhoods is missing the real target, the polycentric system that includes the suburbs and towns where, after all, 3/4 of the population actually lives and where the vast majority of impacts from urban activity are actually generated. We need to refocus on the centers and corridors as part of the 2040 growth concept, and especially on marginal and ugly sites. not on this destructive growth in the core and the destructive politics that arises out of that. Certainly some gentle densification is appropriate as part of a smarter regional strategy, and some code reform certainly, and model development types and other win-win approaches described in the report. But we do seem quite far from that goal. Another fallacy is what I would call field of dreams planning. Plan it and they will come. Often that doesn't happen, as we know. As the 2009 group pointed out, a much smarter and more targeted approach is needed to actually unlock the places that we really want to see growth in. We need the tools and resources and the institutional framework that can develop and deliver those tools and where they're needed. Of course, another reason for the slow progress is that this is all very hard work, undoubtedly. In effect, we are facing a kind of massive operating system for growth, we could say. All the laws, codes, standards, models, incentives, and disincentives, and all the other things that dictate what can be built and what can't, legally and financially. In effect, the challenge is to rewire that system, that operating system for growth, slogging through code by code, incentive by incentive. And yes, this is slow work, but we've already made a lot of progress and we should take satisfaction in that. The 2040 plan is itself an enormous step forward, and the work in its implementation is a great step forward as well, including the 2009 Centers and Corridors report, I would argue. So I hope that now the region will redouble its efforts to begin building the institutional infrastructure, the tools and the resources that are identified in this report, so that we can achieve the kinds of communities that we want: livable, equitable, affordable, sustainable, and worthy of our reputation as international urban leaders.